RRS Discovery was the last traditional wooden three-masted ship to be built in Britain. Designed for Antarctic research, it was launched as a Royal Research Ship in 1901. Its first mission was the British National Antarctic Expedition, carrying Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton on the first successful journey to the Antarctic, known as the Discovery Expedition. It is now the centerpiece of visitor attraction in its home, Dundee. Design. Early discussions on building a dedicated polar exploration ship for the British government had considered replicating Fridtjof Nansen's purpose-built ship Fram, but that vessel was designed specifically for working through the pack ice of the Arctic, while the British ship would have to cross thousands of miles of open ocean before reaching the Antarctic, so a more conventional design was chosen. In charge of her overall design was W.E. Smith, one of the senior naval architects at the Admiralty, while the ship's engine, boilers and other machinery were designed by Commander Philip Marrick of the Royal Naval Engineers. The ship borrowed many aspects of her design from the Bloodhound, a Dundee-built whaling ship taken into Royal Navy service as HMS Discovery in 1874 for the British Arctic Expedition to the North Pole. By 1900, few yards in the United Kingdom had the capability to build wooden ships of the size needed. Only 2 shipbuilders submitted bids for the contract, but it was deemed essential that the ship be made from wood, both for strength and ease of repair and to reduce the magnetic interference from a steel hull that would allow the most accurate navigation and surveying. The main compass was mounted perfectly amidships, and there were to be no steel or wire fittings within 30 feet of this point. For the same reason, the boiler and engines were mounted towards the stern of the ship, a feature which also provided maximum space for equipment and provisions. The ship was almost built in Norway by Framnes, the yard which would later build the Endurance, but it was thought that the British government's money should be spent at a British yard, and the Discovery was built by the Dundee Shipbuilders Company, which primarily made smaller vessels such as trawlers, tugboats and steam yachts. The yard was previously owned by Alexander Stephen and Sons and had built the Terra Nova in 1884. The ship cost £34,050 to build, plus another £10,322 to be fitted with engines and other machinery, and more than £6,000 for other equipment and fittings. The total cost for the Discovery was £51,000, equivalent to £4.1 million in modern currency. Discovery was fitted with a 450 horsepower coal-fired triple expansion steam engine, but had to rely primarily on sail because the coal bunkers did not have sufficient capacity to take the ship on long voyages. At her economical cruising speed of 6 knots, she only carried enough coal for 7,700 miles of steaming. The voyage to New Zealand covered over 12,000 miles. At 8 knots she could steam only 5,100 miles. She was rigged as a bark, and the total maximum sail area was 12,296 square feet. Following the practice of the most modern sailing ships of the time, the windjammers, she carried split topsails to reduce the size of the deck crew needed to handle them. The ship was rigged to carry several large staysails, and the funnel was hinged at the base so it could be laid on the deck when the large mizzen staysail was rigged once at sea. The Discovery was marginally faster under sail than she was under engine. Her record for distance traveled in 24 hours is 223 nautical miles, equivalent to 9.2 knots in GT. The ship has a massively built wooden hull designed to withstand being frozen into the ice and resist crushing. At the time of her launch, Discovery was widely held to be the strongest wooden ship ever built. The hull frame beams, placed much closer together than was normal, were made of solid sections of oak up to 11 inches thick. The outer hull was formed from two layers, one 6 inches thick and an outer skin some 5 inches thick. A third lining was laid inside the frames, forming a double bottom and skin around almost the entire hull. This meant that in places the hull was over 2 feet thick, providing not only formidable strength but excellent insulation against the cold. The construction meant that it was impossible to install portholes, so the crew relied on mushroom vents on the deck to allow air and light into the interior. The wood used for the planking varies depending on where in the ship it is laid and what structural purpose it serves. The inner layer is Scots pine, while the 6-inch skin is made of pitch pine, Honduras mahogany or oak. The outer hull is made of English elm and greenheart. Oak beams run across the hull, forming 3 decks. The lower deck beams are 11 inches square in cross-section and are placed less than 3 feet apart along the ship's length. 7 transverse bulkheads, also of wood, provide additional strength and ensured that any flooding caused by ice damage would not flood the entire ship. To prevent damage from ice flows, a crushing the 2-blade propeller could be hoisted out of the way and the rudder could be easily detached and stored aboard. Iron shod bows were severely rigged so that when ramming the ice they would ride up over the margin and crush the ice with dead weight. The coal bunkers on each side contained a steel tank, each of which could hold 60 tons of fresh water. On the long ocean trip to and from New Zealand, these tanks could hold additional coal, but for the Antarctic voyage the extra water capacity was more important. The metal tanks also contributed to the strength of the lower hull around the boiler and engine spaces. On the 16th of March 1900, in the context of significant donations to the approaching expedition by patrons Llewellyn W. Longstaff and the British government, construction on the Discovery began in Dundee, Scotland, by the Dundee Shipbuilders Company. She was launched into the Firth of Tay on the 21st of March 1901 by Lady Markham, the wife of Sir Clements Markham, President of the Royal Geographical Society. History: British National Antarctic Expedition. The British National Antarctic Expedition departed the UK less than 5 months after the Discovery was launched and only a week after the ship left Dundee. This left little time for the ship to undergo sea trials, and the voyage to New Zealand was also the brand new vessel's shakedown cruise. Scott's first impression of the ship was poor, considering her slow and unresponsive, while the shallow hull, built with no protuberances to work well in ice, provided minimal stability. Discovery rolled heavily once in the open sea intended gripe. Shackleton described the ship as a bad sailor, carrying too much sail aft and not enough forward, while Scott also worried that the design of the ship's hull was unsuitable for work in pack ice. But once the expedition reached the Roaring Forties, the ship proved to have excellent seakeeping, and, because she was heavy and carried relatively little sail area for her size, she could make good progress in high winds and heavy seas without having to reef. The Discovery's unusual rounded, overhanging stern not only provided more protection for the rudder but also prevented all but the largest following seas breaking over the back of the ship and kept the decks dry. Although the stern was prone to slamming into waves, making the officers' accommodation and wardroom noisy, the ship was put in dry dock for the first time at Littleton, and the carpenter, Frederick Daly, prepared a lengthy report detailing the numerous empty bolt holes and slack hull fittings he found. 6 feet of water had seeped into the ship's bilges and lower hold through badly sealed joints in the planking. While these were repaired, there was considerable dispute between the RGS and Dundee shipbuilders as to who was responsible for the defects. But the Discovery left for the Antarctic on December 21, 1901 after after 3 weeks in New Zealand. 5 months after setting sail on 6 August 1901 from the Isle of Wight, she sighted the Antarctic coastline on 8 January 1902. During the first month, Scott began charting the coastline. Then, in preparation for the winter, he anchored in McMurdo Sound. The ship would remain there, locked in ice, for the next 2 years. The expedition had expected to spend the winter there and to move on in the spring. Despite this, the expedition was able to determine that Antarctica was indeed a continent, and they were able to relocate the southern magnetic pole. Scott, Shackleton and Edward Wilson also achieved a further south of 82 degrees 18 minutes. The ship was eventually freed on 16 February 1904 by the use of controlled explosives, which allowed the ice to be moved away by butting and shunting, thus assisting in the breakup of the ice. Discovery finally sailed for home, arriving back at Spithead on 10 September 1904. Cargo vessel. The British National Antarctic Expedition was acclaimed upon its return but was also in serious financial trouble, and so in 1905, Discovery was sold to the Hudson's Bay Company, who used her as a cargo vessel between London and Hudson Bay, Canada until the First World War, when she began carrying munitions to Russia. In 1916, she was loaned to the British government to rescue Shackleton's party marooned on Elephant Island, but they were rescued before she arrived. In 1917, she carried supplies to the White Russians during the Russian Civil War. At the end of the hostilities, Discovery was chartered by various companies for work in the Atlantic. But outdated and outclassed by more modern merchant vessels, she was soon laid up, spending the early 1920s as the headquarters of the 16th Stepney Sea Scouts. Discovery investigations. In 1923, her fortunes were revived when the Crown agents for the colonies purchased her for further research work in the Antarctic. Re-registered to Stanley in the Falklands and designated as a Royal Research Ship, Discovery underwent a £114,000 refit. In October 1925, she sailed from the South Seas to chart the migration patterns of whale stocks, as part of the Discovery investigations, with zoologist Sir Alister Hardy on board. Her research role continued when the British government lent her to the British, Australian and New Zealand Antarctic Research Expedition. She served in this duty from 1929 until 1931. Boy Scouts, Sea Cadet Corps. Returning to Britain, her research days now over, Discovery was laid up until 1936 when she was presented to the Boy Scouts Association as a static training ship for Sea Scouts in London. During the war, her engines and boilers were removed for scrap to help with the war effort. Too costly for the Scouts Association to maintain, she was transferred to the Admiralty in 1954 and formally commissioned as HMS Discovery for use as a drill ship for the Royal Navy Auxiliary Reserve and also training ship for the Westminster Sea Cadet Corps. As the years passed, her condition deteriorated, and when no longer of use to the Navy, she was in danger of being scrapped. The Maritime Trust, into whose care she passed in 1979, saved her from the breakers' yard. Her future secured, she was berthed first on the River Thames next to HMS Chrysanthemum and HMS President, and later in St. Catherine Docks. During this time, she remained the home and training ship of the Westminster Sea Cadet Corps. She reverted to the Royal Research Ship designation and was open to the public as a museum. The Sea Cadet Unit eventually relocated to onshore premises in Pimlico, situated in the converted converted basement of a local council estate. The Maritime Trust spent them £500,000 on essential restoration until she was passed into the ownership of the Dundee Heritage Trust in 1985. Discovery Point, Dundee on 28 March 1986. Discovery left London aboard the cargo ship Happy Mariner to make her journey home to the city that built her. She arrived on the River Tay on 3 April, moved to a custom-built dock in 1992. Discovery is now the centrepiece of Dundee's visitor attraction Discovery Point. She is displayed in a purpose-built dock, in a configuration as near as possible to her 1924 state, when she was refitted in the Vosper Yard at Portsmouth. She is listed as part of the National Historic Fleet. Discovery Point is a fully accredited museum and has won numerous national awards, as well as being a 5-star rated tourist attraction with Visit Scotland. In 2008, Discovery and the associated polar collections were named as a recognized collection of national significance. Since the 1990s, the Discovery Point Museum has concentrated on interpreting the vessel on all of her voyages, with personal items from the ship's crew as well as information on her scientific activities. Items range from the games played by the crew on her first expedition to examples of sea fauna. Star objects on display including Captain Scott's rifle and pipe. Her 3 main voyages, the National Antarctic Expedition, the Discovery Oceanographic Expedition and the BNZARE Expedition, are all explored in the museum through film and photographic evidence with artifacts from each era represented. The museum also holds other pieces from Scott's subsequent Terra Nova expedition and Shackleton's Endurance expedition. The ship also features on the crest of the coat of arms of the British Antarctic Territory. Subsequent ships. There have been 3 subsequent Royal Research ships named Discovery, RRS Discovery.It, and the third named RRS Discovery. A 4th ship is the current RRS Discovery, which was built in 2013. The spaceship Discovery-1 in Arthur C. Clarke's book 2001, A Space Odyssey, was named by Clarke after RRS Discovery. Clarke used to eat his lunch aboard her, as she was moored near the office where he worked in London. According to Clarke, he was unaware that RRS Discovery was launched in 1901, so the fact that she was celebrating her centenary in the year of his book is a coincidence. The Space Shuttle Discovery is named for RRS Discovery.